So today we're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. So just one verse. We're looking at the very first of the 8 Beatitudes listed out by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And today is all about what I consider to be the ultimate New Year's resolution. The ultimate New Year's resolution. We are coming up to New Year's. It's only a matter of days away. As I spoke about last week, sometimes people get to this period of time in the year and they start to think about goals that they would like to set for themselves for the year ahead. And I would like to think at the end of this sermon, the resolution that is going to be developed and put to you at the end of this message, I really do hope that this would be the one and only New Year's resolution that you would set for yourself for 2021. As I said, we're about to enter into 8 weeks of teaching on the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes, for the most part, are essential aspects of Christian living. They're not really negotiable. It's really a case of this is what a Christian looks like. This is how a Christian acts. This is how a Christian talks. This is what a Christian believes. This is their attitudes and their actions towards others. And each one of these Beatitudes begins with a blessing. But every one of the blessings is conditional. Something has to be done by the Christian in order to receive the blessing. And so it is with today's blessing and today's Beatitude that we're looking at today. And the other thing we need to keep in mind as we go through the next 8 weeks is that not only are they essential to Christian living, but they're essential prerequisites to each other. In fact, if you haven't got today's Beatitude down pat, if you're not living out today's Beatitude, then in a few weeks' time, you're going to find it very difficult when we get to the sermon on hunger and thirsting for righteousness, because no one is going to hunger and thirst for righteousness in their heart unless they're living out the Beatitude in Matthew 5, verse 3. So let's get into it and see what today's Beatitude is all about. So in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Right here in this passage is Christianity 101. This is like introductory biology, introductory psychology. You can't go on and start doing molecular biology until you understand basic biology. You can't do protein sequencing, genetic sequencing, until you've done your introductory biology subject. So it is with this Beatitude. This is ground level, foundational level Christianity. If you're not nailing this one, you're not going to have any chance of nailing the rest of them that are yet to come. This is like the concrete pillars that you put into the ground before you build your skyscraper. This is like the concrete that you lay out perfectly, put all the pipes in, poking out of the ground before you build the rest of the house. This is essential. This is foundational. And it's also essential to our salvation that we look like this, that we are like this. Because as I'm going to show you, the blessing, like all of Beatitudes, is conditional. And as you can see in this passage, the blessing that we receive is the kingdom of heaven. Salvation is at stake in this Beatitude. That is the blessing that is granted to us when we fulfill the requirement of this Beatitude. So this is ground level, fundamental Christianity, essential to our salvation. So let's look at some of the Greek. I love looking at Greek. I don't do it every sermon because I don't want to bore you. But this time it's important that we understand the words that we're dealing with. We've only got one sentence. If we don't understand the words in this sentence to their fullest, how can we hope to understand what Jesus is asking of us in this beatitude? So what does Jesus mean by blessed? Well, in the Greek, the word is makarios. And makarios defines someone who is happy or fortunate. And it also describes this supernatural state of well-being. So it's not describing a physical happiness or something that we can obtain in our life, so to speak, physically. So talking about something that we obtain spiritually, something deep in our soul. And it was used by many Greek writers at the time that this scripture was written. It was used by these writers to describe somebody who is wealthy or somebody who is very successful at business. Well, what about the word poor? This is very important that we understand what the word poor means, because often when we think about the word poor, we're thinking about material stuff, aren't we? We're talking about poverty, talking about the absence of things in our life that we need. Well, in the Greek, tokos, because I'm pretty sure the P is silent, means to shrink or to be reduced to total destitution. So it's not just talking about, being on Centrelink, renting, but still having some belongings, still having a roof over your head, still being able to get food. No. It's talking about total destitution. It's talking about I don't have a roof over my head. I don't have social security. I only have the clothes on my back if I'm lucky. I don't know where my next meal's going to come from. It's talking about total destitution, total poverty. So when we read the passage, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Another way of trying to understand this passage, and it was given to us by the great Billy Graham. It was incredibly insightful. I'm going to share it with you now. Billy Graham said, when referring to this passage, if you replace the word poor with the word humility, you will go a very long way to translating this passage correctly. So let's give it a go. Blessed are the humble in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the humble in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So what this passage is saying is that you are blessed, and you are blessed with the kingdom of heaven, the inheritance of salvation, eternity with God. You receive this blessing when you have a complete poverty and loss of self and pride. When you are completely humble within yourself, then the kingdom of heaven is yours. And I've said this before in a couple of sermons previously, especially in James. And I said that Christian humility is thinking more about God and less about yourself. Christian humility is thinking more about God and less about yourself. You see, we must humble ourselves daily and see our spiritual poverty apart from Jesus. We must humble ourselves daily and see our spiritual poverty apart from Jesus. We cannot save ourselves. We cannot make ourselves perfect in the eyes of God. Our fallen human nature, right to our very core, means that we will always do that which we know we shouldn't, and we will not do the things that we know that we should. It doesn't matter how hard we try, there's always going to be something that's going to come up. And we're going to do something that we knew that we shouldn't, or we're not going to do something that we knew that we should. This is an unavoidable aspect of being human. And it stains us to our very soul. It makes us imperfect in the eyes of God. And nothing we can do can change the sins of our past. Even if we could be perfect from this moment forward, that stain will remain with us for our whole life. And the consequence of this is that when we stand before a perfect being and we are judged imperfect beings, we will receive the full weight of judgment of God as a result. Unless we see our spiritual imperfection to its very core, we look into the face of the perfection of God, we realize that we are imperfect in the face of such perfection, and that the only way we can be made perfect in the eyes of God is for our love and faith and belief in Jesus Christ. It is He, Jesus, that can make us perfect in the eyes of God. He is the only means of being seen perfect in the eyes of God. And such absence of pride, such realization of our spiritual poverty and our need for Jesus, this level of humility is essential to being a Christian. It's essential to our salvation. If we don't see our imperfection before a perfect God, if we don't see the depths of our sin in our heart, if we don't see that there's nothing that we can do to make ourselves right from God, that it's all about Jesus making us perfect before God, if we don't have this fundamental, foundational aspect to our Christian living, we do not get the conditional blessing. We do not inherit the kingdom of God. The humility aspect is essential to receiving the blessing. You see, it begins not with our own works. It's not what we can do. Even that sense of pride of, I gave my life to Jesus, I serve Him, I do all these things, I do all these works. It's not about that. It's not about your own kingdom of ministry. It's about the ministry that Jesus is doing in your soul. It's about the work that He brings about in your heart. That work that makes you perfect in the eyes of God. It has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with Jesus. See, perfection, as I've said before, highlights imperfection. And imperfection highlights our need to be made perfect. Nobody wants to be imperfect. In our lives, we always strive to be better. There's always things we want to fix or improve. Could be superficial. Maybe you want to go get Botox or get a nip and a tuck or put some makeup on or wear nice clothing. Something that makes your figure look better. Something that pronounces your chest. Or maybe it's deep-seated change that you're looking for. Maybe you want to see a psychologist. Maybe you want to do some cognitive behavioral therapy, overcome some deficiencies in your personality. Or maybe you want to improve your standing in life so you get a more highly paid job. There's so many aspects in human life, so many different ways that we look to make our lives more perfect, to make them better. But it's just window dressing. It doesn't change what's in here. It doesn't change the inside of our soul, the imperfection that stains us in the eyes of God by simply just being human. The only thing that can change that, is Jesus. We are made perfect only by him. He is what makes us perfect in the eyes of God. And there's nothing we can do to make ourselves perfect before God. It's all about Jesus. You see, life is not about what we want. Life is not about what we need. And life is not about what we deserve. But often we go through life with that mentality, don't we? I deserve respect. I deserve to be acknowledged. I deserve to be admired. My accomplishments matter. They must be recognized. My efforts deserve a pat on the back. There must be some reward. Somebody must notice what I'm doing. But life is not about that. You see, it's all about what Jesus did on the cross. It's all about what he's doing now in our hearts to make us more like him, to bring about salvation in our hearts, to bring about this work that will make us perfect in the eyes of God. It is his work only that achieves this. And it's about what he will do when we stand before God. He's going to take it for us. He's going to stand with us. And instead of receiving judgment, because of Jesus, we will receive mercy instead. It's all about what Jesus did, what he does, and what he's yet to do. And we see this level of humility, this absence of pride, this poverty of spirit, this understanding of our imperfections in the sight of God's perfection and our absolute need for Jesus. We see this play out in three key people in our New Testament. Firstly, we see this played out in Jesus. So Jesus is wrongly accused. Instead of a criminal being crucified, a mob decides to crucify Jesus instead. He gets tortured. He gets whipped with huge metal claws that rip flesh off his back. He has to carry a gigantic weight of cross on his back. They hammer it into the ground. They nail him to it. They're dividing up his clothes amongst themselves as he is breathing his last breath. And what does he say? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. There is nothing in this man, in his dying breath. The Son of God is there, not thinking about the persecution, the suffering, the respect that he deserves because he is the Son of God, how he's been mistreated. There is no selfishness. There is no pride anywhere in Jesus' heart. Instead, he's thinking about the people before him, separating his clothes. He's thinking about their salvation. He's thinking about their eternal destiny. He's asking God to forgive them. There's nothing of himself in that sentence. It is all about those before him. Even though they have persecuted him, tortured him, mistreated him, he still cares about their salvation. He still cares about their eternal destiny. What about Stephen in Acts? Here is a bloke who just wanted to share the gospel message with people, to tell them about Jesus. And it rattled some Jewish leaders, and they got really upset. So upset, in fact, that they stood around this man with stones and flung them at him and killed him. They killed him. And as he's being hit by these stones, his thoughts are not of himself. His thoughts are not about the injustice being persecuted against him. They're not about the pain that's being inflicted. Instead, he sees a vision of Jesus sitting beside God in all his glory. His thoughts about where he's going to be going. His thoughts about the reward, the blessing. The kingdom of heaven is about to be his. He's about to be there. He can see it. He knows it's coming. And then as his last breath, what does he say? Lord, do not hold their sin against them. Again, a complete absence of self. There is no pride. There's no sense of injustice. There's no entitlement. This is no, I deserve better. I didn't deserve this. I just went out to share the gospel. Nothing. There is a complete absence of self, and there's only thoughts about God and others and their salvation, even in his dying breath. And John the Baptist sums it up the best. He really does. When he says, he must increase, but I must decrease. Jesus must increase in our hearts and in our souls, and we must decrease. We must decrease to the point where, like the example of Stephen, we don't care about the persecution, the suffering, the injustice, the entitlement. We don't care. We only care about seeing Jesus and God and entering the kingdom of heaven. We only care about the salvation of others, about their eternal destiny. The complete absence of self. You see, this is the ultimate New Year's resolution. This right here. That Jesus would increase in our souls and in our hearts, and that we would decrease. This is the ultimate New Year's resolution. This is what your 2021 should be all about. This is what it should all be about. So how can we look into 2021 and set about our hearts being transformed by Jesus, by him increasing in our hearts and us decreasing? Number one, we think more about God, less about ourselves. We meditate on God's perfection. We meditate on God's providence in our lives and in the world around us. We look at the birds. We look at the trees. We look at the complexity. And we humble ourselves. We humble ourselves with the realization that we can't do that. We can try and we can strive to understand it. And we can run science experiments and we can come up with ideas and thoughts and everything. We can't do it. We can't do it. But God can. He can orchestrate that kind of level of complexity. He can bring it about. He can execute it. He can keep it running. Number two, we think more about others and less about ourselves. We see people in need and we seek to care for them. We see people who don't know about Jesus and we seek to bring the gospel to them. We seek to engage with our community and build relationship over time. We seek to serve those in need and to serve others. Number three, we think more about building God's kingdom and less about our own. We're really good at building our own kingdoms. We live in them. We have cars in them, furniture. We have jobs, careers, families. Even our ministry can become its own kingdom unto itself. Sometimes we can do that and not even be thinking about God anymore, but just thinking about it as a construct and making it better and doing it and losing sight of the whole entire reason behind the ministry in the first place. which is to serve others and to be a beacon to God and to help others come to know Jesus, it too can become a kingdom upon itself. But instead, we think more about how can we plant churches? How can we grow home groups? How can we evangelize those who don't know Jesus? How can we set up Bible study groups? How can we sit down and have a relationship with people and read the Bible to them, help them to understand it? How can we meet the needs of the poor and the suffering and the needy in our community? The spiritual, the physical, the mental needs. What can we do to help others and to build God's kingdom? And number 4, we spend more time in prayer praying about the first 3. We spend more time praying that God would help us, that Jesus would help us to see him more and in greatness and greater perfection, and to see ourselves less and less and less, that we would just diminish over time, and that he would increase and that we would decrease. That we spend time in prayer thinking more about the needs of others, praying for others, than we do about our own desires, our own needs. God, please give me this. God, please help me with this. God, please correct me with this. Adding in a bit more about God, please help this person. Please help this person understand the Bible. Please help this person to come to know you. Please help this person get better. Please heal this person. Please help this person to lift the cloud of mental illness from their soul, from their minds. God, please help these people. And we spend more time praying about building God's kingdom and less about building our own. As John the Baptist said, he must increase, but I must decrease. Make being a humble Christian your New Year's resolution for 2021.